Hi, Tim.
Hello, Amelia.
So, taken from the title of your latest book on the topic, so please tell us what the term post-growth means. And do you think that fashion as we know it could really operate in a context where growth does not equal success?
I think there's always a role for fashion. I mean, I think it's so deeply rooted in the human psyche in a sense that we're going to have to live with that in whatever form or whatever world we live in. But my exploration of post growth is the idea of thinking about a situation where our economies may be more dedicated to what it means to flourish in human terms and less dedicated to just chasing after continual economic expansion, continual growth the whole time. And one of the reasons for doing that is because of the damage that creates to the planet. But there are other kinds of damage that continual chasing after growth inflicts as well, and some of it is on human flourishing, is on the idea of what it means to be a human being. And although fashion will always play a role in that, I think growth in that sense of material expansion really can't if we want to be sustainable.
So, yeah, I mean, about post-growth and about the fashion industry, do you think that we can exist in a context where this idea of expansion, rapid expansion, isn't the gold standard for success?
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, what if we can't just go on expanding forever? And I think that's the reality. I mean, I think there's a finite planet, and I think actually we're already particularly in the rich countries, we're going beyond the bounds of what we can really afford in terms of our ecological space on that finite planet. And we're putting other species at risk. We're putting the nature of our environment in risk. We're putting our climate at risk. So what if we can't go on expanding? And I think, there are two ways to think about that. One is to pretend it's not true and just try and forge through the barrier. And the other is to sort of accept, actually, we're living on a finite planet. We live finite lives. We're not, as human beings, people who expand forever and ever. We grow when we're children, and then we grow up, and then we mature, and we learn things. And that sense of us learning things can expand. It can be a rich, exciting place for us to be. But that physical expansion is not available to us. And so I kind of think of this post-growth challenge, if you like, as a way of getting ourselves to grow up and actually understand what it might be like when we're grown up and we're not just accumulating, we're not just getting bigger, we're actually becoming richer and wiser. And where fashion's role in that is, I don't entirely know, because I'm not a fashion expert, but I do know that it's a challenge that actually, to some extent, we're all kind of facing, and how the fashion industry faces that challenge is really important.
Absolutely. And as we've seen, there's so many ways to tackle that complexity and to be creative in that, and to also look at old ways of creating and prospering without having to pay the price that the planet is paying, essentially. But talk to us about the incentive for a post-growth industry. Obviously, many businesses are tied to their stakeholders' expectations, but how can our industry maybe get past that to truly collaborate on protecting our home planet?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And to some extent, you have to think about how industry's done that in the past. And if you think about fashion, fast fashion, for example, it's done it in a very specific way by exploiting cheap labor in other countries to create goods that are so cheap that they're almost throwaway goods. And although it's called fast fashion, I'm not sure how much it really has to do with fashion, because I think fashion is a relationship that we have with each other, and we signal that relationship through our use of, clothes, items of various kinds in our lives, the vehicles that we move around in, the things that we decorate our homes in. All of that is to some extent fashion, but it's a relationship. And the way that the industry built that relationship in the past by exploiting cheap labor to create clothes that were thrown away so fast they were almost throwaway isn't really a proper relationship. It's like kind of speed dating your whole life through, instead of actually growing up and thinking, well, I'd like to have a relationship with someone who matters to me and that I can live with for a long time and maybe have some kids with. That's, in a way, that's the analogy, is it's like, can fashion grow up? Yes, I think it can, but it can't do it on the old model.
No, absolutely. In your book, you talk about the myth of growth, which we're also talking about right now, and how balance, in fact, is key to prosperity, this balance, which you also kind of touched on. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. What did the pandemic teach us? Above everything else, it taught us that prosperity is as much about health as it is about wealth. And health and wealth are two very different things. When you think about wealth, you think about accumulating that, getting richer and richer, having more and more. When you think about health, it's all about balance. It's not about having more all the time. Sometimes it's about having less and being better off from having less. And we live in a world, actually, in which we've continually pushed that more is better line to the detriment of our own health sometimes. And the World Health Organization tells us that actually now more people die from overconsumption, from overnutrition, than die from undernutrition. And that's an extraordinary indictment of a world that just thinks more and more is always better. Almost everywhere you look in your life, it's about balance. It's about not having too much, not having too little, finding that place where we can flourish as human beings. And that's an exciting challenge, actually. It's a cleverer challenge than the one that just says, well, if I have more and more, I'm going to be that much better every day. No, you've got to actually think about when more is too much and when having less is better, and how to survive with that less, and how to develop yourself with that less, how to become richer in yourself through having less and achieving that balance in your life. And that, I think, is a very, as I said, it's an exciting place to be. It's not a stupid place to be. It's not a place where you just dumbly go on chasing more and more. It's a place where you have to think about what matters to you personally, to society as a whole, and indeed to the planet.
Absolutely. And I think, it goes without saying that during the devastation of the pandemic, global inequality has only become more obvious. And so there is a real opportunity for change right now because things are so obvious. Yes, yeah. And finally, I think we should touch on investment, because it also has to do with re-establishing the power structures and the investment. And usually the word investment is associated with fundraising rounds and huge sums of money. But there's also ecological and creative investments that we can make, as well as investments and of care. So where do you think that fashion should put its focus right now?
I think it should be always, to take that term investment, just to start with investment, to some people, particularly if you're not an economist, it's a horrible, boring term. It's things that people in suits do in cities somewhere far away and hopefully give you a pension at the end of it. But actually investment is much more fundamental than that. It's about the time that we commit now, the time and the energy and the resources we commit now, today, to look after the interests of ourselves and our children and other people into the future. Investment is a commitment to the future. And so that is as important in fashion as it is anywhere else. And as you said, I think it's really important to keep that idea of investment in care. And as soon as you think about investment in care, you have to think about your supply chains. You have to think about your workers. You have to think also about your customers, about the best, what is best for them, and how it delivers the social license, if you like, of the fashion industry. But you also have in fashion a very unique place where you can invest in creativity, where you can invest in things that are new and exciting and create new relationships and deeper relationships and build a better society and create not just a fast, fleeting instant of superiority by having the main relationship between people that brings society together. And that creative investment, I think, is in a sense the task of fashion, and the task of fashion to carry out in a long-standing, meaningful and sustainable way.
Absolutely. And also the redistribution of power and investments moving forward.
I think that's right. We should always say that what might be true of rich people in advanced economies is not necessarily true of the poorest people in the poorest countries. And for them, actually, some form of income growth still matters.
Thank you so much, Tim, for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.